Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Now, there is a bit of a discussion going around on the whole difference between a JPEG and RAW and what they really entail and when you should and shouldn't use one. So in this video, I'm going to go over this topic, hopefully clarify some things for you and teach you maybe something about the differences you might not have known. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. One thing that makes JPEG so useful in the photography space is a few things. One of them being it is the most widely recognized file format when it comes to images. They're widely accepted pretty much across every known website, and it just makes it a lot easier to share them because of this reason. Another reason is the fact that the image is already processed for you right out of camera. Now, this is not technically the case when it comes to RAW, which is why you usually need to use some sort of either converter or an editing program to put that raw image in, and then later on convert it or export it rather to a JPEG or another file format like that that is a little bit more commonly used. Another huge upside to JPEG is the fact that they generally have a significantly smaller file size than a RAW file. So this also makes it a little bit easier when you are transferring speeds or transferring either uploading to a computer, taking the image, and the image is now using the processor from the camera and writing it to the memory card. This will be significantly faster since it's only transferring a smaller amount of data versus RAW. And now that we have a good understanding of the benefits of shooting JPEG, let's talk about the opposite. One of the biggest things, at least for me, is loss of detail when shooting JPEG. Now, because the image is already processed and it is a significantly smaller file size, there's not that much data that is captured from the image itself. So what that leaves you with is when you go to edit it in post, you don't have that much data to play with, and a lot of the times any subtle changes that you make could really start to degrade the quality of the image. And this can be seen in a multitude of ways, but the best example I can give you right now would be, let's say you take a photo of a landscape and your sky is a little bit overexposed. You are not going to be able to pull much detail out of that sky and really be able to properly expose and grab some detail in the clouds, for example. The way that I kind of like to give people a visual imagery of it, it would be, think of JPEG as being basically one flat image, right? Whereas a RAW, on the other hand, since it's capturing significantly more data and dynamic range, you are able to adjust the layers of that image. This is generally cut into a couple of spaces, one of them being your highlights, your midtones, and your dark tones. So with all those things in mind, you are actually able to adjust a lot more in depth those tones and those details of the image, not to mention the dynamic range, than you would with a JPEG. And that is a perfect segue into talking about RAW images, and one of the biggest benefits they have over JPEG, as I said, is the fact that they retain an abundance of data. And this really does help, especially if you're a retoucher or a professional. It really does help you edit the image and really take it to another level while still being able to retain as much quality as possible. Now, going back to that example that I mentioned before with the landscape, if you do shoot it in RAW, since the camera is capturing a significant amount of more data, chances are that overblown sky or that overexposed sky, you're going to be able to bring down significantly, bringing in a lot more detail from the clouds and basically being able to balance it with your foreground if you were exposure compensating rather, your foreground to your background. It just makes it a lot easier, and like I said, opens up a wide array of tools and techniques that you can use in your editing that you can't do with JPEG. Now, there's also a couple of downsides to shooting RAW though. Ultimately, you have a massive file size. And when you are like me, shooting a ton of images, quite frequently I might add, you start to realize how much hard drive space and cloud storage that shooting in RAW can really add up and take up. So that is actually a huge downside versus JPEG. Like I mentioned, the JPEG file sizes are significantly smaller. I mean, you're talking about like a fraction of generally what a RAW file could be. So keep that in mind as you kind of learn these differences and later on figure out what would be most applicable to your workflow and give you exactly what you're looking for. Another downside is you're going to need to use some sort of program to convert or export your raw images into a file format that will allow you a little bit more easeability of sharing to pretty much anywhere. Like I said, JPEG is the most commonly used right now that allows you to pretty much share anywhere because it's so compatible across all websites and platforms, whereas your raw images definitely are not. Now, at this point, you may be asking yourself, well, what would be the best format for me? I would say, honestly, shoot with both to really get your feet wet and understand how each one basically changes the image that you take, especially when you go to edit it in post. When I shoot basically live events that the client may just need the images right there and then, I will typically just shoot in JPEG. One, I could shoot a lot quicker that way. The file sizes are significantly smaller, so the transfer time there after the event won't be that long. And a lot of the times, the client are just going to basically grab those images and put them on a website for either the attendees or something like that. So they don't really need a large file format or a lot of editing to go along with those images. And guys, that is going to wrap up the video here. I hope you found it insightful. I know when I was starting to learn photography, this was a question that I really was extremely curious about, and surprisingly found it quite difficult to find some really good answers. But ultimately, it wasn't until I really got my feet wet, started playing with both, and understanding the limitations of JPEG versus RAW, that really did help me not only understand the differences, but also what would be applicable to each individual scenario that I would be shooting. So like I said earlier, I'd highly recommend you shooting both just for the time being to get your feet wet and fully understand not only what your camera is capable of, but the differences in RAW and JPEG for your camera specifically, because that also changes among different cameras. Like I said, that is going to wrap up the video here. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something that you might not have known about the difference between JPEG and RAW. If you guys did enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really does help the channel continue to grow. And if you're new, go ahead and check the links down below. We, the ViewBug community, offer some really cool contests that you guys can enter in to win some really cool prizes, not to mention potentially gain exposure worldwide. So if that is something you're interested in and want to learn more, some links will be down below for you to do so. Now with that said, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.